Hello everyone, we are starting Module 6, so welcome to Module 6. In this module we will be looking at how to teach English language learners, and there's a certain approach that we will be studying called SIOP, S-I-O-P, which stands for Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. And we have been studying immigrant children and their experiences in schools, and you have learned in the last two modules that a good portion of immigrant experience has something to do with language, because a lot of times immigrants will come to the United States with limited English proficiency and their children will have the same issue, and these children will find their place in your classrooms. So something has to be done to teach them, even if they have limited English proficiency. Now we know from research that the most effective way is to use bilingual education, which means you use the child's native language in teaching content like science, social studies, math, and at the same time teach English, and once they get to a certain proficiency, then they can learn everything in English, but until they get to the proficiency level they get to use their native language. But although this is the most effective way, there aren't a lot of teachers who can implement bilingual education. There aren't enough resources. Therefore, this is not very commonly used. But you cannot simply have your English language learners sit in the back of the classroom and hope that they will learn. And this doesn't happen. They won't learn. Something has to be done. And sheltered instruction is one of those good approaches that can help teachers teach English language learners. Now, before we start talking about the specifics of the SIOP, let's talk about English language learners. Now, when you think of language proficiency or English proficiency, in the case of the United States, do not think of it as something, you either have it or you don't have it. Think of it as a continuum. Some people may have zero English proficiency, and some people may have proficiency that's very close to a native speaker's language proficiency, and a lot of people will fall in between the two. So what you do with a child who speaks no English whatsoever is different from what you do with a child who speaks almost native like English, and the ones in between, of course, you do different things. A Canadian educator, Jim Cummins, I can't remember the dates, I think in the 80s or so, he identified two levels of language proficiency. And he said that when people are learning a new language, they go through these two stages. After learning the language a little bit, they get into a stage or a phase called basic interpersonal communication skills. So in this level, children or whoever is learning the language, but we are interested in children, at this level they can conduct social conversations. This level is also called social language, basic interpersonal communication skills. They can understand basic directions, they can speak, but they cannot necessarily handle rigorous academic work. For that, you need another level of language proficiency, and that's called cognitive academic language proficiency. It's CALP, C-A-L-P, cognitive academic language proficiency. And children who have that level of proficiency are able to conduct academic work. They can analyze information, they can summarize information, they can synthesize information, they can answer questions, they can discuss issues, they can propose a solution to a problem, they can defend a position on a given issue. But until they get to that level, they do not have the same skills as other children language wise. Therefore, teachers have to do something to accommodate, and sheltered instruction is the most commonly used approach in teaching English language learners. Now, what sheltered instruction does is that it allows teachers to use English only in the classroom, and this is for classrooms where English is used only. It's not for bilingual classrooms, but making certain accommodations in teaching to make sure that children are able to learn the content and English at the same time. So you're kind of hitting two birds with one stone. You're teaching content, and when I say content, I mean the academic content like social studies and science and math, and then English skills at the same time. The good thing about this approach is that you're making sure that your English language learners are not left behind, because you're accommodating them through planning and everything. And I'll talk about specific stages in a minute. And at the same time, you're working on their language proficiency. Now, sheltered instruction, you will see a lot of readings about sheltered instruction on our module. It has 8 steps, and we're not going to go through every single step, but there are certain things about sheltered instruction that I find extremely important, and I designed the module around those really important ideas. Some of the ideas that you will find in SciUp in your readings are simply good practices that will help anybody, any child, not just English language learners. For example, you are going to see an emphasis on interaction, which really means that you promote interaction among your students through small group assignments, through pair work, through individual work. You will see an emphasis on building background in students. Before they learn something, you actually build the background they need to learn the new content, and you make connections between the background information and the the new information that's coming. So these are all good practices, but there are a couple things that I find extremely important, and I'll talk about this in a second. And the assignment we have for this module, which is a content adaptation assignment, the assignment is designed based upon what I think is very effective, very innovative in SciUp. One of the most innovative ideas in SciUp, in my judgment, is that, it's not just my judgment, by the way. When we made these decisions about this SciUp module in our cultural issues class, every single professor who teaches this class sat down and discussed and agreed that, you know, the assignment that we created would emphasize these effective steps that I'm going to talk about. So this is not just my judgment, it's a collective judgment of the ESOL faculty in my department. Now, according to SciUp, when teachers plan their lessons, they have to come up with content objectives, like any teacher does. You know, these are the key skills and key knowledge that you write in your instructional plans. SciUp says that in addition to your content objectives, you have to come up with language objectives also. So in every lesson, you're teaching children content and language at the same time, but not in a spontaneous manner. You actually plan it ahead of time. If you're teaching math, for example, maybe you are going to emphasize adjectives for your English language learners. Maybe you're going to teach children, you know, smaller than, larger than, greater than. So you plan what language capacities you can teach to your students in a given lesson if you're using SciUp. So language objectives is one of the most innovative, most important ideas in SciUp. The other thing is, as part of instructional preparation, SciUp includes some steps like adapting your content. And what's meant by adapting your content is that sometimes we use text a lot in our teachings at any grade level. And what I mean by text, it's not only the textbooks, you know, the worksheets or single sheets that teachers provide when they teach to their children. Sometimes the information that we provide to our students may be too difficult for English language learners. So what you do is that you adapt that content. And by adaptation, what I mean is that you simplify the language requirements of that given content or given text. You keep the information the same, but you simply make it more understandable, more accessible for your students. You're not watering down anything. Students are still supposed to learn what they're supposed to learn, but you're just making it language-wise more understandable, more accessible for your students. And this is done in multiple ways. And in any kind of text, you are going to find some really complex sentences, for example. If you have a English language learner in your classroom who's a new arriving student who has very little English proficiency, a complex sentence is not going to do any good for that student. So if you have a text that has a complex sentence, and if you're using SciUp, you take that complex sentence and you break it into 2, into 3, into 4, whatever it may be. So you simplify the language of it. You look at the text and you see that there are some important words, but they are not highlighted, they are not bold-faced, they are not underlined in the text. You do that for your English language learners. You actually grab a highlighter and you highlight it for your students. You see some important words, maybe you add a definition. You see some sentences or paragraphs that are kind of unnecessary. You simply take it out. You just leave the most essential information for your students. So that's the content adaptation. There are many other steps. As I said, you will read these, one of which is having comprehensible language input, and you know, when you have an English language learner, if you're not understood, then you know the message you carry is not really important. And I have a little survey kind of thing. Not that you have to take the survey, but it kind of gives you an idea about what's meant by comprehensible input, like, you know, having a clear enunciation, not having very long sentences, being able to paraphrase what you say if your student cannot understand. These are some aspects of comprehensible input. Some other things, SciUp emphasizes strategies, and what's meant by strategies are not strategies that teachers use when they teach. These are strategies that you teach your students to use in their learning. These are learning strategies. There are 3 different kinds of learning strategies: cognitive, metacognitive, and social affective learning strategies. So you teach children how to learn if you're working with English language learners, and this is good for all students again. And then you teach these learning strategies, and you teach them how to use these learning strategies. Some other things, you put an emphasis on interaction, you put an emphasis on providing enough practice and application, and etc. So this is a good system when you have English language learners in your classroom, and I want you to study this carefully and try to learn as much as possible. Having said that, I also want to say that this is not going to be enough for you to, you know, learn SciUp and become proficient at it, or you know, be fully prepared to teach English language learners. This is really introductory information, what you have in this module, but it's good introductory information. So read the you don't have any readings from the textbooks this module. You have some readings that I uploaded, and I have some brief readings about SciUp. Please study those. The assignment you have, that's what I want to talk about. It's the content adaptation assignment. You are going to find a 1-page text that I have uploaded into the Dropbox area, and this has been available to you since the beginning of the semester. I have it in Start Here Module 2. You're going to find the social studies text. It's just 1 page. It's about early civilizations in the Middle East and how they were located near rivers and waters. Anyways, you're going to take this text, you're going to read it, and then assume that you're going to teach a lesson in which you're going to use this text. So to complete the assignment, you're going to come up with 2 content objectives and 2 language objectives. And I have some resources for you in the introduction of the assignment, or instructions for the assignment. I have some links, and if I find any extra information, I will pass it on to you about how to write language objectives and such. So you're going to write 2 content objectives and 2 language objectives. After that, one important aspect of I forgot to mention this. One important aspect of sheltered instruction is an emphasis on important vocabulary, important words that students have to learn to understand whatever they are studying. Now, there are, good words to know, important words to know, and essential words to know. If you don't know the essentials, there is no way that you can understand the text. So your job as part of completing this assignment is to identify words, vocabulary that that are essential to understanding this text. Do not just choose, good to know words or nice to know type of words. Choose the ones that are essential to children's learning of this content on early civilizations in the Middle East. And then after that, you're going to do a couple things. One thing is you're going to write a definition that is child friendly. And when I say child friendly, it's English language learner friendly. Make sure that you have a definition. And after the definition, you're going to explain how you're going to teach this word. So you will have an explanation of the strategies that you will use in teaching this given word to your students, to your English language learners and other students. So you're going to do the same thing for every word that you select. And I think the requirement is that you choose 3 or 4 essential words for vocabulary instruction. So you're going to provide a child-friendly definition, and then you're going to explain how you're going to teach that given word. And make sure that you provide a lot of visuals when you're working with English language learners. You don't want to rely on the oral and written language a lot. You want to provide visuals. So when you teach vocabulary, make sure that you have some visuals as much as possible. After the vocabulary part, you are going to rewrite this text. That's the adaptation part. So that one-page text, you're going to read it. If you see some sentences that are too complex, make sure that you break them down. If you see some information that's not necessary for children's understanding, take it out. If you see some words that are keywords, which you will, make sure that you underline them or you highlight them. Make sure that you make those words, more obvious to the children somehow. If the words are not properly defined in the text, you might want to add a definition somewhere in the text. If you think that there aren't enough visuals, and as far as I know, there's only one visual in the text, and that's a map, and it's a black and white map. If you think that there aren't enough visuals in the text, add some more visuals. So your job in completing this assignment is to make this one-page text more accessible, more understandable to children who may not know English as much as a native speaker, whose English proficiency is not at the level that it's supposed to be. So that's the bulk of your assignment. Now, it's an important assignment, and what I did this week, this module, is that because I want you to have enough time to work on this assignment, I'm running only one discussion. And in the discussion, you're going to talk about the SIOP model, and after studying everything in the SIOP, in SIOP handouts and articles I have for you on the website, I want you to talk about the things that you like, things that you find effective or different in SIOP. That's the discussion module. That's the discussion for the module, and we have 2 case studies from teacherserver.com, and both case studies have some connection to English language learners. And one of the case studies is about silent period, a child who's going through a silent period. And you learn this in studying immigrant experiences. You learn this in reading Igoa's Inner Child of the Immigrant Inner World of the Immigrant Child book. Children do go through a silent period. That's one of the stages of immigrant experience. So that's one of the cases. The other one is the title of the case study is Speak English. I think it's children who are speaking their native language in the classroom and English speaking students getting mad. So if you were a teacher in a classroom like that, how would you react to a situation like that? So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give you different situations that you may face in the future. Again, English language learners are in the classrooms, in American classrooms, and there are more and more of them every year. So there's a good chance that you have one in your classroom. If you're a teacher, if you're not a teacher, you will have one in your classroom. Therefore, learning ways to teach English language learners is extremely important. And again, SIOP is the most commonly used method in doing this. So please make sure that you study all the SIOP materials. And then I have 2 SIOP classroom examples. Make sure that you study those also. Those classroom examples are teachers who are using SIOP in their classrooms, and you will get a sense of how it's applied in the classroom. So that's our module 6. I hope you enjoyed the module. If you have questions, remember we have the Ask the Instructor discussion forum running all the time, so you can ask your questions there. I will talk to you when we start module 7. So goodbye for now.